You think you know what true privacy is? Today we're talking about the real-life invasions authorized by governments from around the world. From monitoring citizens' every move to psychological experiments, these are disturbing surveillance projects that were real. Most of us think of government surveillance as a pretty modern thing. We associate it usually with the internet and hidden cameras everywhere, but even before the web, surveillance was a thing, thanks to telegraphs and telephones. Corporations, private detectives, government agents, they were all already tapping wires and intercepting messages, often with zero legal oversight. They were monitoring telegraph lines. When telephones became a thing, they moved right onto those. And were they just spying on quote-unquote bad guys or even suspects? No, they were often keeping tabs on people like political activists, labor organizers, anyone who they thought could be a problem. What's genuinely chilling is how normal this practice really was. People had no idea their private messages were being read, and the spies faced few, if any, consequences. Surveillance is much older than the computer. The tools have changed, but the core idea is exactly the same. And Project SHAMROCK is a great example. It was launched right after World War II. It was basically the government reading everyone's telegrams. Every international message going in or out of the US was copied by big companies like Western Union, Radio Corporation of America, and International Telephone and Telegraph, before being handed over to the National Security Agency. They'd go through all of it, and anything that looked interesting got passed to the FBI, CIA, or Secret Service. Nobody asked a court for permission, but nobody knew it was happening. The story actually starts a few years earlier though, in 1940, when the Army secretly put an officer inside RCA to photograph all international cablegrams. That set the stage for decades of mass surveillance. And by the 50s, the program was tapping the communications of dozens of foreign embassies, and NSA staff were printing and analyzing hundreds of thousands of messages every month. The companies were nervous about breaking the law, but the government promised it wouldn't get in trouble and passed a law making it illegal to reveal what was going on. The program kept running for 30 years. Until 1975, when Congress started asking questions. Investigators found that it had broken wiretap laws, and Senator Frank Church called it probably the largest government spying program on Americans ever. After SHAMROCK was shut down, Congress passed the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act in 1978, making sure that future surveillance at least required warrants and some oversight. Project MINARET ran from 1967 to 1973. The NSA kept watch lists of people they wanted to monitor and intercepted any electronic communications that mentioned their names. And just like with SHAMROCK, these messages were then passed on to the FBI, CIA, Secret Service, who knows where else. There were no warrants, no oversight, nothing to stop it. There were some big names that were monitored. Martin Luther King Jr., Whitney Young, they were on it, along with politicians like Senator Howard Baker, journalists like Tom Wicker, celebrities like Jane Fonda and Muhammad Ali. Over 1,600 US citizens were on the watch lists, and thousands of foreigners and organizations were included too. The NSA produced nearly 4,000 reports on these Americans. The program grew out of earlier attempts to watch Americans traveling to Cuba, and then expanded under Presidents Johnson and Nixon to include anti-war activists and civil rights leaders. Operation Chaos ran from 1967 to 1974. This was the CIA spying on Americans at home. That's a huge deal, because officially the agency was only supposed to deal with foreign intelligence. But they started keeping tabs on activists in the United States. Why? Well, the stated goal is to see if these groups were secretly in cahoots with foreign governments. This operation ended up swallowing dozens of smaller programs. Some involved intercepting mail to and from the Soviet Union. Others used undercover agents to infiltrate activist groups. They also partnered up with local police and college administrators to figure out who the potential dissidents were. Eventually, Operation Chaos had files on over 7,000 Americans. It had a computer index tracking 300,000 civilians. Some of their targets included the Students for a Democratic Society, the Black Panther Party, the Young Lords, and women's liberation groups. They also spied on foreign embassies. At one point, they actually bought a garbage collection company just to go through the Israeli embassy's trash. And for all that effort, the CIA never found any solid proof that protesters were actually working for foreign governments. The whole program stayed hidden until 1974, when investigative journalist Seymour Hersh finally exposed it. COINTELPRO ran from 1956 to 1971. It's probably the most notorious surveillance program in US history. It really is terrifying how far the FBI went. They didn't just spy on people, they were actively trying to mess up their lives or end them. Who was on the list? Just about everyone pushing for change. Again, Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, the Black Panther Party, anti-Vietnam War activists, student feminist Native American groups, Chicano activists. The tactics were brutal. They planted fake stories in the news, they'd forged letters, they harassed witnesses, tried to jail people on false charges, they encouraged violence against their targets. Leaders of the Black Panther Party, like Fred Hampton, were neutralized in ways that went way, way beyond spying and gathering information. Martin Luther King Jr. was wiretapped with approval from Bobby Kennedy himself, and Hoover basically gave his agents carte blanche to dig up everything on King's private life. This program finally shut down in 1971, but I don't think things have ever really been the same since. Let's look outside the United States, though. The Stasi in East Germany, officially called the Ministry for State Security, the Stasi's goal was to know everything about everyone. I mean, that was basically their motto, and they meant it. By the 80s, they'd collected files on around 5.6 million people. That's insane. Roughly 1 in every 6 citizens was either a full-time employee, a collaborator, or an informant. They used every tool they had, checking mail, audio surveillance, bribery, intimidation. The Stasi wasn't just watching political opponents, they monitored neighbors, coworkers, even family members. People could be reported just for making a simple joke about the government. Everyone was walking on eggshells and never knew who was going to stab you in the back. Their surveillance wasn't confined to East Germany, though. The Soviets helped set up the Stasi in the US, and West Germany had their own spies operating there. The US had a massive listening post in West Berlin for years. When the Berlin Wall fell in 1989 and East Germany collapsed, demonstrators stormed the Stasi headquarters, and all those files fell into the hands of the new government. Next up, we have the Karma Police. Most of us are familiar with the Radiohead song, but it's actually the UK's mass surveillance program, run by the UK's Government Communications Headquarters, or GCHQ. It started around 2008 and was exposed in 2015 thanks to Edward Snowden. What it did was track the IP addresses of anyone visiting websites, essentially building detailed profiles of what people were doing online, all without anyone knowing, of course. The scary part is how powerful this was when combined with other GCHQ programs. An IP address alone might not tell you much, but cross-referenced with other data could paint a very detailed picture of someone's online life. According to the documents, the goal was either to profile every web user on the internet or every website being visited. In other words, they were trying to map out the entire web and everyone using it. Back in the early 2000s, the US government launched something called Total Information Awareness, or TIA. Their goal was to collect and link massive amounts of data, like financial records, travel histories, communications, to try and predict and prevent terror attacks. The problem was, they wanted to do this to everyone, not just actual suspects. Civil liberties groups were quick to call it mass surveillance on roids. They wanted to crunch and analyze everything about your life, just in case you might be involved in something suspicious. They weren't just using old school phone taps anymore. They were creating one single system designed to track nearly every person in the country. This is when surveillance went from targeting a few people to trying to track an entire population, an early warning sign of the digital surveillance age we're living in right now. Let's take a moment and go further back, though, way back to the early 1900s. When the US was ruling the Philippines, the Army's intelligence division was busy creating super detailed dossiers on Filipino citizens. They collected information on land ownership, family connections, and political views, all just to keep an eye out for people who might cause trouble. This was not a small operation. It was a systematic state-run program designed to control an entire population. It's crazy how thorough they were. The government was tracking their everyday lives, and they were doing this long before computers or the internet was around. Finally, let's talk about China's modern but historically important grid-style social management. The country is basically chopped up into administrative grids, and each one is monitored, collecting detailed information on everyone living there. They take all this grid data and mix it with digital surveillance, cameras, travel records, and what people get up to online, to build one massive society-wide surveillance network. While it uses modern technology in there, the core concept has been around for a very long time. Break communities into small, manageable units so you can easily track and control the entire population. It's neighborhood by neighborhood, right down to tracking people's daily routines. With all that said, I've been your host, James, and I'll catch you, yes, you specifically, in the next video.